Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week. In fact, at least for the moment, the last week that we will be doing the post daily news update. Again, for those of you who have not necessarily been keeping up with all of our announcements, we are beginning G1 coverage, and I am also set to begin my paternity leave shortly after that. So we're going to be making some changes, and one of the things we have to temporarily sacrifice, at least, are these post daily news updates. But nonetheless, we will be continuing all of our other shows with Raw, Dynamite, SmackDown on the Patreon, as well as all of our other Patreon coverage, and also G1 coverage, of course, beginning on Saturday. But in the meantime, let's enjoy these, and also let's also take the time to enjoy the presence of one Kate from Montreal, filling in for John Pollock, who is celebrating the birthday of his son right now. So happy birthday to Max. But how are you doing, Kate?
I'm doing very well, and yeah, happy birthday to Max from here in Montreal. Hope he's having a good day. Have you all managed to recover from the sort of the Rogers internet disaster
I
last week?
believe so. I believe he is back online. He is with the cell phone. So I think everything is okay for now. Did it affect you at all in Montreal, Kate?
It well, it did and it didn't. It didn't in the sense that I'm with the other the other
Got it.
big internet provider in Canada. But it did. I mean, in the sense that like our Interact services went down. Like you could like
Hmm.
actual financial transactions were remarkably difficult for a while. It was like we went back to the dark ages and had to start using cash.
It is a real reminder, of course, of how reliant we are on this thing that you and I probably grew up not necessarily having, but that was just a bit of a taste, and I hope they make some precautions for next time. And that this
Mhm.
inevitably happens. But thankfully, you have the internet, I have the internet, and therefore
Yes.
we can be here to talk about today's pro wrestling news. Kate, when we were looking for stories today, I mean, it looked to be pretty barren over the
Hmm.
weekend.
Hmm.
So I was a little bit concerned about what we would not be able to talk about, but I think by the time that we're starting the show at 1 p.m. Eastern, seems like there's at least a good deal of conversation. So I have no doubt we will um, entertain and hopefully enlighten a little bit as well. And we start off here with something that was just popped up onto the site by our own Andrew Thompson today. Wall Street Journal reporters were on Busted Open Radio. Wall Street Journal's Joe Palazzolo and Ted Mann appeared to answer questions about their recent articles regarding Vince McMahon and the various NDAs attached to his name in covering up alleged sexual misconduct. As I mentioned, the full transcriptions from the interview are up on postwrestling.com, courtesy of Andrew Thompson. So Palazzolo and Mann, they indicated that they've been working on the story since April when they were tipped off about the WWE board's investigation. And Palazzolo says, when it comes down to it, Vince controls the company essentially. So there's a governance issue. It's important for our readers to understand what's going on. And then we sort of knew that these allegations, while the company is saying that this is a consensual relationship that he had with this woman, we started hearing about other issues that were not consensual. So we feel like those are things that need to be reported as well. Mann says it's a public company and we're operating in an environment where there is very little tolerance for any sort of relationship of this type between CEO or an executive or someone who is a subordinate, even if it is consensual, because the power dynamic that exists there is something that has proven to be really dangerous for the more subordinate person in the company. And so that's one of the ways in which all public companies have been representing that they're not really going to allow things like this to be swept under the rug anymore. And certainly in this case, when there's something that was a total secret from the board, some members of the board for a long time, we find it interesting and that makes us want to go digging and find out more. So that's just a little bit about why they decided to embark on this story itself. Speaking specifically about the latest article that they released, Mann says, as we were reporting about what settlement agreements were existent, the fact that there was one for $7.5 million was fairly eye popping. That's a figure that, in the murky world of NDAs, clearly suggests a big secret being kept. And that was one of the red flags that seemed odd to us that we had to get to the bottom of what that was and what it was for. Palazzolo, finding out that there was that $7.5 million agreement was really surprising. I mean, it shocked us. The details are pretty horrifying, frankly. To coerce a sex act to them basically driving somebody out of the company because they refuse further advances, as this woman has alleged, that's all pretty terrible behavior. When asked if future stories may continue to come out as part of these investigations, Palazzolo says, I think yes. I think that it's probably not done yet, and we're continuing to report. So yeah, well, I can just say we don't know of another $7.5 million NDA if that's like so. No, all I am saying is you're asking if there's something bigger than the $7.5 million NDA. Nope, that's not something we have in our back pocket. We sort of have left it all out in the field in this story, and there's a couple of things that we didn't that we're still reporting now, but it's iterative. Mann says, and sometimes it's a case, as happened in similar scandals elsewhere, that there are people who have something to share who become a little more emboldened to talk about it since once some of the first coverage has happened. And, we're still working to figure out if there are such people out there. So just a bit of the behind the scenes detail. Oh, I think we might have lost Kate, unfortunately. So hope she pops back in here. But just a little bit of a minor behind the scenes detail about obviously what is currently the biggest story in the industry right now. Kate, you've had a chance to at least see some of these transcriptions. What are any
Yeah.
other thoughts?
Well, I think what they're saying doesn't exactly surprise me. I particularly agree with the the statement from Ted Mann, as he says just at the end of the article, that there is a tendency for stories like this to beget other stories like this, where leaving aside the question of non-disclosure agreements for the moment, that the the fact that a story gets out there does make other people feel empowered or able to talk about their own experiences. So it would not entirely surprise me. I agree. I don't think that there's anything like another $7.5 million non-disclosure agreement out there that's going to come out, but there may well be other stories. And look, we saw that within wrestling with the speaking out movement. This started with a couple of stories regarding one or two wrestlers and became this industry-wide thing within a very short amount of time. I do have to say too that $7.5 million, that is a shocking amount of money. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, and like without, like, I'm not saying it's the most ever, but if you look at just other other such payments that have been made in these circumstances, like you're talking about things often in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. 7.5 million is a very big number, and yeah, I do expect that there's going to be more follow up. I think that it's an interesting it's an interesting look at how corporate culture may have shifted, and they get at this in the interview with Busted Open, where clearly what might have been tolerated from CEOs in the past, when from a time when Vince McMahon first took over in the business, what might have been tolerated there is not tolerated by people within the industry. It's not tolerated as business process. So,
Mhm. I thought it was really interesting to hear somebody, like these reporters who typically don't cover professional wrestling and their takes on how crazy it all sounds, especially like the
mhm.
$7.5 million agreement itself. It's something that I don't necessarily have sort of that much context for, because in wrestling I think everything is a little crazy, but I don't know if
Mhm.
that's normal for other people. But this was a bit of an indication. Over the weekend, have you gotten that much of a sense of how big this particular article might have been compared to the first? Because just a bit of a note on that, we don't have the ratings for SmackDown yet, but we do have the Fast Nationals, and I think the indicators, although again they're Fast Nationals, so they can be different from the end result. It's indicating at least SmackDown as a rating being at least stable, if not a little bit down. So not having at least as much of a push towards the TV ratings as the first article has.
Yeah, I don't know how much people are even going to register that these are two different articles. Like, unless you're very much involved in following the story. I think, like, a friend of mine who does not follow wrestling at all, I had made a comment on Twitter about Vince McMahon, and she kind of chimed in, like, wasn't there just this horrible scandal story about him. And I think that she's fairly indicative of the level of knowledge that the mass public has of this story. They might be aware of who Vince McMahon is. They've heard that there is this story out there. I think and people have talked about this. There is this sense that the whole industry is kind of weird and gross, and so that this is almost something that's expected. So I don't even know if this is going to lodge in the public mind as being a different story than the one they had heard just a few days before. It's just, okay, Vince McMahon is being accused of stuff. There's an NDA. There were payments made. Whatever.
And that's like that aspect is really interesting too, because I think like to us, seeing one story that's out there is plenty serious, but seeing 3 other stories in addition to that one suggests a concrete pattern of behavior. But to somebody with a very kind of superficial maybe opinion or at least knowledge about this whole thing, I mean, does it add that much more? Their opinion of Vince McMahon is probably already not necessarily great. Does this necessarily change a whole lot? I don't know. And ultimately, how much does public opinion matter in comparison to well, actually, it matters a whole lot, of course, when you're talking about sponsorships and TV deals and this Netflix thing.
It does and it doesn't, because the fact that they have these deals locked in for a significant amount of time gives them a not inconsiderable stretch to play with and manipulate the story and to try to spin it in their favor. It's not like they're going to be worried about losing sponsors within the next week or so. It's a longer game.
For the typical WWE fan, the one who attends these shows, and when Vince walks out, gives him a big standing ovation, do you think it changes any of that behavior?
I would like to think so, but no, I don't. I think that now the people who are giving Vince the big ovations and genuflecting and cheering when his music hits, I don't know how many of them follow these stories close enough that they would be really aware of what's going on. But I think that a lot of them, even if they do know, the take is, well, it's that kind of industry. He's always been like this. He's Vince. He's he's a crazy guy. This is the kind of thing he does. And, he was just there has been a great amount of emphasis by his supporters put on the facts like, well, this was consensual, which is not exactly what has been said, but
they claim it was consensual.
Yes,
we obviously
WWE says it was consensual. That is not that is not quite the same thing. And he does have his defender. So I don't know if I think that the people who were there getting excited for him have already thought, okay, wrestling's got a lot of weird, bad crap in it. I'm just going to tune that out and try to enjoy this because this is what I turn to for fun and I need that. Or just, hey, it's like they don't have a serious problem with that behavior because they don't think it is a serious problem.
Just staying with the Vince McMahon story, somebody who at least made a little bit of headline over the past weekend was Chris Jericho, who gave his comments on some of the controversy involving his former employer. Now, it is very important to note that this interview was conducted prior to the Wall Street Journal's latest article, which revealed the existence of the further hush money transactions with 3 other women. But Chris Jericho was a guest on the True Geordie podcast and was asked about the original June 15th article published about Vince McMahon, which revealed the existence of a $3 million hush money pact between McMahon and a former WWE paralegal. I'm going to play a bit of a clip just from the interview here. And again, this is from the True Geordie podcast, which you can find on True Geordie Extra right here on YouTube and also wherever you download your podcast. But here we go.
It's alleged that, he paid someone off a good few million to keep quiet after an affair. Is there surprise within the wrestling industry that happened?
Not really. I mean, is there surprise in any industry when it happens? And really, when you look at it, it's really not illegal. He had an affair, paid the lady off to not say anything and moved on. So it's almost like, okay. And people want to jump on it, but there's still always a undertone of it's wrestling. Oh, it's just wrestling. And if you look, that story came out with a bang, and then you really haven't heard anything about it since.
Yeah.
If this was, Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein and that sort of thing, but the difference between that was he was holding women back from getting gigs. Harvey Weinstein, either bang me or you don't get the starring role. This has never been said in Vince's thing. There was a mutual acknowledgement of this affair, and then he paid the lady to say nothing, and she took the money. So, I really know Vince well, and it sucks that it happened. It sucks that he did it, but is anything really going to happen from it? I really don't think so.
He's putting a public front on. He's certainly not acting like someone who's got anything to be ashamed of.
He never does. He never does.
The fact that he walked out on SmackDown straight away and announced SmackDown as if to say, "I'm what?"
That's Vince McMahon.
Yeah,
Fuck
and
you.
then he was at the UFC on the weekend. Like,
what are you gonna do about
suited
it?
up? Yeah,
yeah, and like I said, I think that it'll come and go. And once again, is it morally right? Absolutely not. Is it illegal? No. Is it something that is going to get him in real trouble? I don't think so, because once again, unfortunately, it's just Vince McMahon. It's just wrestling. Of course he's going to do that. So, those things come and go and they happen, and it's too bad, but I really think it doesn't really matter in the long run. And, 6 months from now, I'll either be right or I'll be wrong.
So that was Chris Jericho on the True Jody podcast, again, in reference to the original article from the Wall Street Journal on June 15th, speaking about the paralegal and the $3 million NDA that was signed to keep that relationship under wraps. Do you have any thoughts, Kate? Just your initial reaction to the clip?
Everything that I just said about how I think people will react to this story in general, Chris Jericho just kind of expressed right there. That is the exact attitude that I unfortunately think this is going to get. That now, Jericho, again, although he was speaking at after only the first article had been published, and the allegations that came out in later articles are much more distasteful. He was perfect. It was still the WWE saying that the relationship was consensual, and that he is just picking up their line and repeating it as if it is a verified fact. And that's so yes, it was before the later article came out, but he is already sort of taking that story and morphing it into one that adopts the WWE's perspective on what's happening. I think that this has been the past week has been a really interesting object lesson on our ability to parse the media we consume, because it becomes very easy to sort of condense certain ideas and sort of warp narratives, possibly without meaning to. But yeah, as I said, I don't see this sticking terribly, because the exception being that if Vince is found to have, I guess, used company funds in a way that was illegal, then I think that has some professional implications for his future. But I think that Jericho's take there is very much the take that WWE fans will have and will continue to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the one hand,
WWE fans, I'm not going to say everyone.
Mm-hmm. There's certainly, like, and you were alluding to this in our prior discussion, but the idea that this is just professional wrestling. Carnies will be carnies, and you know what? This is not news even, because this is not unexpected behavior from somebody like that. While at the same time, this is also a company that is trying to move out of that whole world, and is trying to gain legitimacy, and is trying to at least attract the type of sponsorships and the TV deals that are not of that entire side. So how do we not hold them to the same standard that we would to a Harvey Weinstein or somebody else? Besides that, I think Jericho in this clip, even just talking about that first article, seems to have a very superficial understanding of some of the details that were put out there. The fact that, it has been reported, like the consensual aspect is something that might be predominant at this point. The fact that it was simply said by the WWE side and therefore kind of taken as fact by everybody else, that is somewhat troubling. The idea that this is ultimately an employer having this relationship with an employee is also very much understated, and the various power dynamics not necessarily taken into account whatsoever. What else?
Well, I think Jericho there too. Again, we were talking about how attitudes have shifted about certain things, and one of those attitude shifts is about the meaning of consent when there is a very obvious power dynamic. Harvey Weinstein, one of his defenses was that a lot of these relationships that he had were consensual, that they weren't. That he wasn't expressly told no, but that becomes a very that becomes a very difficult concept when there is this gigantic gap in power, where one person obviously has a great deal of power over the other. So we'll see how that's perceived. I think Jericho obviously comes from is coming at this from the perspective that I guess what we called old-fashioned, that no, the power dynamic isn't important. What's important is, did she say no in a way that absolutely that should have forbidden things from going forward, and if she didn't, it doesn't matter. So
the other interesting aspect about, and by the way, of course, the further stories have come out, and perhaps the most damning one is the one that is attached to the $7.5 million agreement that alleges, at least in the article, that a person was coerced into performing oral sex for Vince McMahon. So anyway, we don't have Jericho's comments on that yet. I'd be curious if he does further interviews speaking about this. Yeah. But the other aspect of this clip that I found really interesting was when the host was kind of talking about Vince's behavior in response with his public, I would say, performances of being on TV, starting out there, showing up on the UFC with his face, almost as if to indicate that, wow, look at this wacky dude, like he's responding this way, he doesn't give a shit. I don't know if, and again, I don't know the host's opinion on the whole thing, but the way it felt to me was almost like they were saying, there's Vince, what a character, he doesn't give a shit, almost sounded like there was a little bit of reverence, for the type of behavior. And I mean, even if he does, I don't know how he personally feels about it, but it's certainly a take that I've seen from it's exactly, I think, the intent of a Vince McMahon, as we've heard from various backstage reports about Vince saying fuck him after appearing on TV and treating business as usual. Did that jump out at you at all, Kate?
I was left with the same impression, and that there is, and not just from the, again, I'm not trying to put words into the mouth of the host, but yeah, that there is this sort of Vince is gonna Vince. He's this guy. He doesn't give a shit what anyone says about him, and that is a very carefully cultivated public image that he has been working on for north of 20 years, like 25 years. So this is. I think that it wouldn't surprise me if the whole idea, like the leaking of the story that he walked backstage and said fuck him, came from someone close to him, because that is kind of how they want to portray him, as bigger than all of this, as the guy who people have come for him before and they haven't succeeded. And so I think that they're I can see the WWE very much trying to lean into that character, not necessarily in an obnoxious way. I don't might strike people as some obnoxious, but to sort of play the hand that, what, he's toughed a lot of things out before, and this isn't going to be the thing that takes him down, and that might ultimately be true.
Continues to be, at least this week, the biggest story in professional wrestling. And if there are any further updates or developments, we will be covering it here at Post Daily News. Let's move on here to WrestleMania. The WWE released a statement today indicating that this year's WrestleMania in Arlington, Texas, generated $206.5 million in economic impact for the Dallas-Arlington region in April, according to a study by the Enigma Research Corporation. This marks a new company record and the first time in history that WrestleMania has generated more than $200 million in economic impact. This is, of course, the second two-night WrestleMania in front of a live audience, but the first one without limited capacity requirements. The study also found that 67% of fans that attended WrestleMania were from outside the Dallas region, staying an average of 3.5 nights. $2.5 million was spent on hotels and accommodations. The economic impact from the week was equal to the creation of 1,777 full-time jobs for the area. So, by all accounts, it seems like the most economically successful WrestleMania in history, a 2-night event. Any surprise there for you, Kate? And does it indicate anything about the continuation of the 2-night experiment here?
Something about the company that conducted this research. They work to provide research and backing materials for companies to be able to market their live events to local and state governments to get subsidies and to try to encourage cities to bid on hosting big live events. So this is, I'm not disputing the numbers that are in it, but view it for what it is. It's a company essentially doing marketing for WWE in order to get cities to bid on hosting WrestleMania and other big WWE events. There's a very big economic impact that comes from hosting an event like this. There are also a lot of hidden costs, which I'm guessing are not accounted for in that figure in terms of things like tax rebates offered at various levels of government. But yeah, look, it's a big number, and the WrestleMania is certainly, if you are a city and you want to try to generate fast revenue by hosting one of these events, WrestleMania is a proven commodity.
Yeah, it's a great point that you put out here. Ultimately, any sort of press release that we typically see from a company is not necessarily news based. It is PR based, and it is a way to, perhaps attract other people to want to get into the brand. So, but I don't think though that the economics of the success of this event can be understated, though. If anything, it tells me that they will be continuing with the 2 nights.
Yeah.
If there is continued demand, at least at this level.
I can't think of an argument to go back to 1 night at this point. Like, I literally, from business perspective, it's there would be no reason.
Let's go up next to AEW, where PAC is set to defend the AEW All-Atlantic title in Dublin on July 22nd. After successfully making his first All-Atlantic title defense against Shota Umino yesterday in Sheffield, England for Revolution Pro, PAC is set to defend in Ireland's OTT promotion on July 22nd in Smithfield, Dublin, against 23-year-old LJ Cleary. And speaking about the match, Cleary tweeted, "I woke up on my 21st birthday finding out this match was canceled, wondering why did this happen. It's 2.5 years later, and I am 10 times the wrestler and 10 times the man, and PAC is the AEW All-Atlantic champion. I am Ireland's best time to be the world's best." So LJ Cleary is not a name that I'm familiar with, Kate. Have you seen any of his stuff?
I have not, but good move. As soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh, gonna go, look him up on each match, find out where I can see a bit of him. I do hope that they follow the same pattern with this defense as they have with the one against Shota Umino. They're going to be airing it on Dark Elevation. I look forward to seeing him. I think this is an interesting start for a title that rightly has generated some skepticism and criticism.
Certainly attached to the name, and attached to the concept itself. But I mean, ultimately, we see it in practice now, and essentially, it is their traveling title. Particularly, it seems like in the UK, where somebody like a PAC can hold the AEW flag to travel to various promotions, while at the same time giving some of those promotions at least a little bit of extra coverage and extra press, whether it be in the form of news reports like this or appearances on Dark as a way to sample a lot of what's out there. So it's a cool concept. Again, a lot of controversy perhaps surrounding the creation of the tournament and whatnot, but in practice, I think having a traveling title is interesting and put some eyeballs on somebody like an LJ Cleary that a lot of people might not know about. So that is the latest with PAC and AEW. Let's talk a little bit about A&E Rivals, Shawn versus Bret. Did you watch this, Kate?
I did, yes.
Okay. Well, initially, this was something I only brought up because it felt like it was such a slow news day. And I was just at least a little bit curious to see what more information or what an updated look at Shawn versus Bret can look like to a very casual audience, we must say. You know, these A&E shows. I believe they premiered a bunch of shows yesterday on A&E with the WWE, one of them being an Undertaker biography. But one of them here being Shawn versus Bret. What did you think about this 1 hour look at one of wrestling's greatest rivalries?
I think it's interesting because we were just talking about Vince, and certainly if you pick the genesis point of the Mr. McMahon character, it's the Montreal Screwjob. I mean, that is where it comes from. I didn't find that I learned anything really new. It was interesting hearing some of the perspectives from the men involved. This is a very, very heavily mined story, though. Like, this is something that has been written about and spoken about and had documentaries made about it a lot. I do think that it was very, very obvious that WWE were behind this show. Like, certainly the kind of need to drive home. It's like, no, Vince did the right thing. Vince really did the right thing. You need to understand he was doing what was best for the company. It's like, okay, I got it. It's I don't. But look, it was well made. I thought hearing the perspective of some of the current wrestlers, it was interesting seeing who they gave time to speak on this documentary. That was to me kind of revealing in itself.
Yeah, among the people that got to speak in this were, of course, Shawn and Bret themselves, but we also had Kevin Nash, Sean Waltman, Triple H, of course. Cody got to speak a little bit about it. Kofi Kingston and also Bruce Pritchard as well. Somebody who played a very integral part in at least the reconciliation of Bret and Shawn towards the end. TJ Wilson getting a bit of camera time to speak at length about it too. You know, people like Cody and Kofi, you know, play the roles of essentially like fans that are, you know, that were of a similar age to perhaps like, you know, somebody like myself who were big fans at the time and watching just from a distance, giving their perspective of all the events. And that part of it, I guess, was somewhat new. You know, we hadn't heard from at least some people like that, but really nothing different. And again, we should state that this is very much a Cole's Notes version of everything that had happened for people that know nothing about it. You know, it's something you present to a new fan, and that's what the intent of these A&E shows are, in my opinion. Very much like Drive to Survive.
And as such, it was very well edited, very well paced. Look, the WWE know how to put together a good video package, and this was obviously, this is not them running the show on their own, but it did have their strengths on display.
So there was a lot of emphasis put on WrestleMania 12 and how that was such a career highlight for both men when times were good, or at least like an indicator of what the possibility of the great art that these two could create could look like. And then it just kind of, you know, quickly progressed to a breakdown of various things. There were like mentions of like, you know, a backstage fight that the two of them had with hair pulling. Bret ultimately getting the $2.6 million a year contract with WCW. And then we go right to Survivor Series where Bret does detail, and they did include this, Bret does detail the exchange that he and Shawn had where Bret said something to the effect of like, you know, despite all our differences, I'd be happy to drop the title to you. We will be professional. And then Shawn coming back and saying, I will not do the same for you. And I think in recent years, that's kind of come to indicate like Bret's turning point, or where he made his decision that he wasn't going to drop the belt to Shawn. So that little bit was included here. But then we get, of course, you know, the WWE's, and I would say very much like the tone of the episode was very much from Bruce Pritchard and Triple H stating that ultimately we couldn't afford Bret Hart to go onto TV on WCW with the championship. JBL does counter that. He doesn't believe Bret would have done it, but because Bischoff had done it with Alundra Blaze, that was the company's justification, or at least his justification.
It was a risk. Like that's there was definitely, you know, that had happened, and it would have looked terrible if Bret Hart had done the same thing. I agree with JBL in this one. I don't think that he personally would have, and he maybe had more power to make that decision than Alundra Blaze. But yeah, and it wasn't an insignificant concern.
Yeah. Again, in an hour show, I suppose you could only get so deep. I would have loved to have heard Bret's side of it. I also feel like the element of creative control has always been incredibly understated when it comes to these WWE versions of the events. The fact that Bret had it, and how, you know, it's not as clear and dry as this guy wouldn't listen to company orders type of situation. So that is missing from it. And, you know, you can maybe chalk it up to WWE's control of the narrative, or also just the limited runtime. But you should know what you're going to get when you're watching this. Bret talks about how he stayed in bitterness for a lot of years. Shawn ultimately, had his own demons and issues, and how the both of them seem to have come out of it different people now. A bit of information about maybe the reconciliation with, TJ being the facilitator of their eventual meeting. There was a little bit of a clip as they followed Bret at that night of TV when he returned to the WWE, where, he's in catering, and Shawn, their first interaction is actually in catering, where Shawn comes up to him and basically asks him if he wants to talk. And Bret ultimately says, let's just do it live on TV. And that was ultimately what you got. Now, I don't know if it was necessarily, I forget if it was revealed in the past, but Bret does reveal that, when he was whispering to him towards the end of the segment, Shawn said, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything that happened." So, and then we get like a really, I would say, awkward present day encounter between the two that was like, obviously staged for these cameras, where they're in the back. This is WrestleMania weekend. Shawn comes in, and they're just kind of like, they have the worst hug like in the history of hugs.
I honestly don't understand why they didn't just do it and acknowledge that it was staged, rather than sort of trying to do these half-assed hidden camera, like natural reaction. Like, no, just have them sit down together and have them face the cameras, and just like don't try to pretend that this is anything other than what it is, which is a presentation for the cameras to show that they still get along. That's fine. We'll get it. We get it.
I'm not so sure that they were attempting to hide the cameras in any way. I think
not
might have been
exactly,
as simple as like, hey, here's this guy in a room, here's this guy walking in another room. We're going to film how it's going to be, and it was the worst hug ever. But
it was just they're so camera conscious, and it's like, okay, no, just in that case, just have them stand there very directly addressing the cameras.
Shawn does say that they're not best friends, but Bret will still reach out on birthdays and wedding anniversaries. So maybe they're more of a text-based relationship these days than an in-person relationship, and that's totally fine. But it was nice. It was nice to get maybe every 10 years, a bit of an update on the WrestleMania, on the Montreal Screwjob, and how the world can, or how the WWE is able to retell that story. Seeing these two like now very old men talking about like grandchildren, there's also something really sweet about it too. Growing up with them, and now seeing Shawn completely bald, Bret completely grayed hair, reminiscing about old days. That's kind of nice too. So that's A&E Rivals. Maybe not for the particular type of audience that we're catering to on this podcast, but if you're a new fan, if you're somebody who might be be like, hey, this is what this thing was about in 1 hour's time, you might get something out of it. Last thing I want to talk to you about, Kate, is WWE Raw tonight. WWE Raw, we have at least a few things announced, a bit more than usual, and that includes Brock Lesnar making an appearance, talking about the Roman Reigns match, of course, at SummerSlam. And then also we have Riddle versus Theory. That is also a match that's been announced. And also, I don't think it's listed necessarily here, but Bobby Lashley is set to have an open challenge. So is there any interest to any of this for you, Kate?
I am probably I have a whole strategy for tonight because the season premiere of Better Call Saul is on at 9. So I'm probably going to I'm probably going to watch the first bit of switch over, and then I'm just going to after Saul is over, I'm just going to catch up on what I missed, and I think I am betting that I will be caught up on the full show before it gets to 11 o'clock. I think that I will be caught up with the hour that I missed and everything that follows it before it. I'm willing to bet I'm going to see about the last 10 minutes of the show live.
Oh, you will.
Um,
Yeah. I don't doubt that.
I don't. It's just maybe does the Riddle versus Theory sound like sort of a Batman villain showdown?
Yeah. And then maybe we can have the
that's all I'm thinking about. That it's like it just sounds weird.
we can
Anyway,
have the Enigma Research Corporation talk to us about how what great business that match did. Yeah, Riddle versus Theory. So that's what's happening on Raw, everybody. We will be back tonight with John Pollock as we review everything, of course, on Rewind to Raw. But before we get out of here, a couple super chats courtesy of the person we will probably miss the most as we end these post daily news updates, at least for now, and that is Rory from Australia, who is pretty much like the sole sponsor of these shows now. Rory sends $8 to say, need Santino Marella to read the room and not book Marty Scurll. Trinity replying to Lindsay Dorado, yay. WSW here in Australia was great. Saw Cardona and Mundo. Okay, so Rory is making reference to the fact that Marty Scurll was recently announced today to be taking part in Santino Marella's Battle Arts Pro out here in Mississauga. And the video seemed to indicate that he'd be doing some sort of like MMA influence, jiu-jitsu influence style. Nonetheless, of course, with Santino, or sorry, with this being Marty Scurll, you can expect what the replies were, what the backlash was to the tweet. Do you have any thoughts, Kate?
Look, Marella is he is aware of the wrestling industry. This is a booking decision that he made with I am assuming the knowledge of what's happened in the last couple of years and why Scurll hasn't been on television. I know it's not the first promotion to book him, and
has there been a promotion other than the little thing with New Japan? Has there been a promotion at least attached to a prominent name in North America that has booked him?
In North America, there was there's a promotion in Puerto Rico run by the Colon family,
right?
And they had booked him for at least one show, and I think maybe more that he was working with them. I haven't followed it really closely, but I do remember that. And then other than that, I've seen he was booked by promotions in Europe, although I believe he's still based in the U.S.
So yeah, I mean, that is here we go. Here's the little video from Santino himself. But I mean, it's to me clearly like Santino taking a stance on the issue. So for those of you who maybe need a bit of a reminder, it was what happened with Scurll was something came out where he basically, it was revealed that he had sex with somebody who was 16 years of age, which is, so we should know, which is the legal age of consent in that part of the world. But nonetheless, this was something that people have responded to with very
someone
emotional.
who was inebriated at the time. I think that was also part of the issue, was that what she said was that she was drunk enough that the question of her consent was up in the air, whether or not what happened was technically legal. And just if your case for something that you're doing is that it was technically legal, you're already anticipating that people are going to have a problem with it. Like, just think of how you would react if someone told you about anything that they'd done. It's like, well, it was technically legal. The ground is already shaky, and I'm not going to litigate this, but yes, certainly he was one of the most, possibly the most prominent name from the speaking out allegations to really sort of lose his position in the wrestling world.
Rory also says, sends an another $8 Australian super chat. Thank you, Rory. He says Jericho will hopefully be wrong in 6 months. The Natalya thing is weird. She did like the Owen stuff on AEW. Pumped for G1. I got a show every week in July. Okay, a lot of things Rory is packing into these super chats. So, are you aware of the Natalya situation?
I'm sorry, I'm not. I have missed this one.
So a clip is circulating out there right now from a house show that took place with the WWE of Natalya.
Sorry, I did see this. I did see this. Yes. Okay.
And the finish has her basically. She took the pinfall after the Oblivion Liv's finisher, and then she immediately gets up without selling the move, and seemingly yells at Liv for some reason before storming out of the ring. So people are speculating whether or not this was, sort of a, what do you call it, Austin Aries situation from Impact or something else. I don't know what to make of it. Like, I always open the possibility that shit like this could be a work just to kind of generate buzz. Everything we have to suggest would be speculation. Something did occur though, was Natalya tweeting and then deleting something to the effect of her saying, she said thank you. Like Natalya was saying thank you, and now it doesn't look like that much of a thank you to me. But anyway,
no, but
it is part of the conversation. Honestly, Rory, I have nothing to add. It is weird. I do agree with you there. Jake from the Windy City sends $5 to say, I saw the Taker bio on A&E. Also good. To think over 30 years ago, Ole Anderson would tell him that no one would ever pay money to see him wrestle. Wow, did he say that? He was wrong.
Wow.
All right.
Hope he didn't put money on that.
Yeah, thank goodness. Davidian Alter sends in $5 just to support. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you to everybody who's watching us live. Despite what we thought was going to be a pretty slow news day, we ended up having 46 minutes of conversation through it, and all of it enjoyable. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining me again. Where can people find more of you?
My absolute pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Been on these a few times recently, and yeah.
And where can
Always
people
exciting.
find more?
You can find me on Twitter. I am She Rants About Wrestling at SheRantsMTL, and commenting on all sorts of wrestling promotions and things that I follow. Might be a little slow on the Raw tonight though, because I'll be with Saul.
She Rants About Better Call Saul. I think it would also be a very cool Twitter handle as well. But John and
I promise I won't put any spoilers.
John and I will probably be ranting a little bit about Raw tonight on Rewind to Raw here at youtube.com/postwrestling. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And also, don't forget, the best way to support the channel, other than some of these super chats, is to become a member at postwrestlingcafe.com, where we have bonus shows every single week, starting tomorrow with Drive to Survive. Season 1, episodes 1 to 3. John and I will be talking about the F1. And then Friday, of course, Rewind to SmackDown. And then G1 coverage starts Saturday with bonus shows all throughout the course of the tournament, July and August. So postwrestlingcafe.com. You can follow me at Way0937. I will talk to you tonight.